Good afternoon, everyone. Today I'm excited to present our second REES student choice for our seminar series, Dr. Jennifer Winter, who won our economics vote. Jennifer is an associate professor in the Department of Economics and scientific director of Energy and Environmental Policy Research Division at the School of Public Policy, both of these at the University of Calgary. Her research evaluates climate policies and examines the effects of government regulation and policy on environmental or energy development and associated consequences and trade-offs. Dr. Winter is co-editing 2 books, one on the experiences of Indigenous communities with resource development in Canada, and a second on measuring the impacts of energy infrastructure. She has testified to the Senate of Canada on emissions pricing policies based on her work in this area and has advised the Government of Alberta and Government of Canada in several capacities. Dr. Winter serves on the Future Leaders Board of Directors of the World Petroleum Council Canada. Is it interesting? Of Canada? No, just Canada. The City of Calgary Climate Panel, the Board of Directors of the Canadian Society for Unconventional Resources. Is a member of the Mitigation Expert Panel at the Canadian Institute for Climate Choices and is a member of the Global Affairs Canada's Environmental Assessment Advisory Group. It's a privilege to have someone with such a wealth of knowledge and experience to come talk to us today about a topic that has been top of mind argument in Canadian politics, that being carbon pricing and its impacts. So without further ado, please welcome Dr. Jennifer Winter.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here and in person. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is environmental taxes and energy poverty, and this is very much a work in progress, and so your thoughts and inputs are very welcome, and part of because this is a work in progress, we don't have a paper written yet, and so it's very much in the formative stages. So today's talk may be a little bit unusual and slightly unstructured because of that, and also because of the crying baby in the hotel last night. I feel much more sorry for the poor baby rather than me, but I am a little sleepy this afternoon. Okay, so this work has come out, so it's joined with Felix Fosu, who's a PhD candidate at the University of Calgary, and Blake Schaefer, who's an assistant professor at UCalgary, both in the Department of Economics. And this work has come out of sort of my general interest of the impacts of carbon pricing on households and how revenue recycling can mitigate those impacts, as well as some work that Blake and I did for the BC Basic Income Panel, where we looked at energy poverty in BC, and after that we thought that there was something sufficiently interesting to try and explore it for Canada. So I'm sure most all of you are aware we have carbon pricing in Canada. So the federal government has instituted a minimum pricing standard that provinces must follow. It's currently at $50 per ton, and it's rising $15 per ton per year to 2030. It'll be at $170 per ton in 2030. And the federal minimum standard is such that provinces implement their pricing policies, and if they are deemed sufficiently stringent or equivalent to that federal minimum standard, then the provincial policy applies. If they're deemed not to be sufficient or equivalent to that federal minimum standard, then the federal government imposes what is called a carbon pricing backstop. So, for example, BC has a broad-based carbon tax. It's fully compliant with the federal system. Alberta has a large emitter system, and in 2019 eliminated the carbon tax on households and small emitters. And as a result, Alberta is a partial backstop province. And with all of this, obviously, as economists, we're aware that incentives matter, and the whole entire point of the carbon tax and the carbon pricing system for large emitters and for small emitters like households is to incentivize behavioral changes to reduce emissions across the economy, but the consequence of that is that energy costs increase for households and the overall cost of living increases because of those embodied emissions in goods and services produced. And there is a concern that carbon pricing disproportionately hurts low-income households. And then on top of that, there is this issue that carbon pricing in Canada has become incredibly politicized because it's become a federal provincial area of tension, and it's become a right-wing, left-wing area of tension. And there's also just a lot of populism around carbon pricing. So here are some examples of the attacks or opposition to carbon pricing. My favorite is this one with the gas prices, the swoopy bar chart thing. That was the Ontario gas tax ad. This one about Justin Trudeau. This is my personal favorite because those numbers come from calculations I did after my Senate testimony on emissions pricing. And I wrote a blog post and no one paid attention to it. And then all of a sudden it got picked up by the news media and the Conservative Party. But, regardless, it's become somewhat of a third rail of Canadian politics, that there is this deliberate policy choice to increase the cost of living for hardworking Canadians. So it's become embedded in some political rhetoric. And then most recently, we've had significant disruption in oil and gas markets that have caused significant changes in prices. And so these are just recent articles in the last couple of months that I've pulled from CBC. I'm sure there are lots of other examples from other news stories about how energy costs have become an issue, like front and center as a policy issue and as an area of discussion. And that has turned it into a political issue. So it's the carbon tax increased effective April 1st, and it became a big deal. It became a big political deal about how the carbon tax increased, even though the actual change, say per liter of gasoline, was 3 cents. So very much a marginal change, but it still became a big political issue because it was happening at the same time as these large increases in energy costs. And at the same time, we have, like in Alberta, a huge budget surplus, and that has prompted these energy affordability programs, so eliminating the fuel tax in Alberta, rebates for electricity bills and rebates for natural gas bills, and then in BC, ICBC gave a rebate to an insurance rebate to drivers. And all of this is, aimed at eliminating the pain of these energy price increases, though at the same time they're distorting the price signal. So it's in many ways problematic. It's a short-term policy solution to an issue that doesn't necessarily reflect the best principles of policy intervention. But be that as it may, many policy choices don't actually reflect the best principles we have in economics. And that's often because of other constraints, which we should be aware of and acknowledge. Okay, so that brings me to what we're trying to accomplish with this paper. And it's really, what is energy poverty in Canada? And what's the current status? How many households are in energy poverty? What is the definition of energy poverty? And what household characteristics are correlated with being in energy poverty? And I know I haven't defined energy poverty yet. I'm being a little bit coy because it's actually less simple than you might think, or at least it was less simple than Blake and I thought when we started getting into this about 2 years ago. And then, so what is the expected effect of environmental taxes on energy poverty? So it's obviously with increasing the cost of energy, all else equal, say not changing consumption behavior, you'd expect it to tip some households into energy poverty. And we're wondering, okay, how much does that matter? Or what is the effect of $50 a ton versus $170 a ton? You know, assuming, say, no behavioral change versus assuming some behavioral change. And then fourth, like, what is the effect of carbon tax rebates or other policy, not necessarily using carbon tax revenue, but what are the policy levers that governments can use to address energy poverty? In that it might be the case that lump sum rebates like the federal government does with Alberta and other backstop provinces, that might not be the best mechanism to address energy poverty and things like that. So that's sort of the bigger, broader question that we're hoping to address with this paper. So we're using Statistics Canada's social policy database and model to answer this question. We're looking at exposure to energy poverty and the interaction of environmental taxes and energy poverty, and that's all I have to show to you today. We haven't progressed sufficiently to look at revenue recycling and revenue uses in mitigating energy poverty. Okay, so our contribution is it is an important policy issue that is understudied in Canada. I can name, I think, less than 10 papers that I'm aware of that look at the issue of energy poverty in Canada, which I think will be increasingly important given our expected systemic changes associated with Canada's net zero ambitions and economic disruption associated with net zero, and even like the current geopolitical environment. As an example, BC has pledged on its path to net zero by 2050 that it will leave no one behind. And with increased electrification, that's going to change how we use energy. It's probably going to change how much energy costs, and defining and describing the current state of energy use and the presence of energy poverty is important before determining how to alleviate that issue to not leave anyone behind. And so what we're doing here is we're doing our best to have a comprehensive review of different indicators or measures of energy poverty and those household characteristics that are correlated with energy poverty. And I want to emphasize that nothing I'm showing you here today is causal. It's correlations, because that's the data we have available and because of the actual difficulties in measuring energy poverty. And also, there's some insight into the short-term challenges from increasing environmental taxes. I mean, obviously, over the long term, as carbon prices increase, it increases the incentive for behavioral change. But in the fairly short run, there's limited ability of households to switch their behavior, particularly when we're talking about long-lived assets like houses, cars, appliances, that sort of thing. And so this is, I think, an important short-term issue that shouldn't be neglected in terms of our long-term policy.
Sorry, just a clarification question. I don't know much about this subject. What are we doing with the resets of the tax? Is there a particular direction that we're using these taxes?
The carbon pricing
Yeah.
revenues, it depends on the province.
Okay.
So backstop provinces, so that's where the federal government has imposed the top-ups in terms of generally the tax on households. It's a lump sum rebate that's through income taxes, and it's quarterly, or it used to be annually, but it's now quarterly. And so it's lump sum, and that's dependent wholly on household size.
Okay, so that's the reason I am asking the question, because you're talking about energy poverty, which means households who are not rich, I guess.
Yes.
And so if they get this kickback, it does have an effect, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. So the federal climate action incentive, it's not means tested. So it's everyone in a backstop province gets it, regardless of income, as long as they file their taxes. BC has implemented a means tested rebate with a top up for rural households. And then, but BC's revenue is not fully recycled to households. They use it to pay for other programming. New Brunswick chose to do a variety of things, including lowering personal income taxes. I have another paper that looks at this and the different revenue recycling mechanisms, whether or not they're regressive or regressive.
What do you mean by mean tested rebate?
Oh, sorry. So means tested is the rebate is a function of income, and so it approaches zero as income increases to a certain level. And means tested is generally, it's a more progressive way of recycling revenue. It benefits lower income households more. Okay. Right. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to briefly go into the methods and ways of measuring energy poverty. I'm going to talk very briefly about the SPSD and SPSDM, and then I'm going to show you lots of pictures with the results as we walk through these measures of energy poverty. Okay, so one of the challenges of what exactly is energy poverty is it's not actually well defined or has a concrete measure associated with it. So, most basically, it's households' ability to afford energy services, but you can think of situations where a household is energy poor and they're actually not using that much energy because they're making the choice between food or keeping the lights on or keeping their home at a comfortable temperature. Or you can also think of a situation where a household is in, say, energy poverty because they live in a house that's extremely energy inefficient, and so to pay for the energy, they're foregoing other consumption opportunities. And maybe they're not making the choice between eating and heating the home, but they are foregoing other types of valuable consumption activities. Okay, and so there is no official measure of energy poverty in Canada. There is an official measure of poverty, and that's a market basket measure income threshold that's dependent on province and urban size. So NRCan in its most recent energy fact book reported this 10% income or energy expenditure to income ratio. So it's a household's energy expenditure divided by their income. And if it's greater than 10%, then a household is considered to be in energy poverty. I'm just going to check the chat.
It's fine, I just.
Oh, you did?
Oh, this one?
Oh, very cozy.
No.
Okay. Okay. And so as part of this report for the BC Basic income panel, Blake and I undertook a literature review to see what is out there in terms of defining energy poverty. And there's no real one definition, and there's lots of argument in the literature about what is an appropriate way to define and measure energy poverty. One thing, and there is two very distinct strands of literature focusing on developing countries, and then another strand of literature focused on developed countries. And we restricted our analysis to developed countries. I think the other point I'll make is there's lots of work in Europe focused on energy poverty. There's even like a European Commission initiative focused on energy poverty called, I think it's the Energy Poverty Observatory. And so there's lots of work and resources there. And then I think the last point is, so there's no real settled definition, and the majority of work looking at energy poverty in Europe, it focuses on in-home energy use. So that's electricity, natural gas or heating oil for home heating, and or other sources of energy. And it usually abstracts from transportation energy use, which may or may not be appropriate when we think about Canada and sort of the density of the population in Canada versus the density of population in most European countries, and correspondingly the availability of high quality public transit that's also like intra-city and intercity. So with this, we are looking at both in-home energy use as well as energy use including transportation, but just direct transportation, so gasoline purchases. Yeah.
I guess data availability is probably a factor in how you would want to think about it, but wouldn't be a comprehensive measure on total expenditure on all different forms of energy use be sort of measured relative to income, almost like an angle curve? Wouldn't that be something you would want?
Yeah.
In an ideal world?
Yeah. Yeah, one of the challenges is definitely availability of sufficiently detailed data. Another part of the literature like assesses more qualitative, like survey-based assessment of energy poverty. So it's like, do you have to conserve energy, that sort of thing. We haven't looked into that, but I think that's another area like ripe for exploration in Canada for any of the students in the room. Yeah.
I have a question. In the most recent census, in the long-form census, they do ask about your utilities bills and stuff like that. Is that something that you guys are going to look at in terms of, I don't know if that's against releasing that or if they plan to?
Probably eventually. Yeah. Yeah, one of the big challenges in Canada is just data availability. So the like the public survey of household spending data, it's averages within a quintile, and the quintile averages on energy expenditure, it includes the zeros for people who have energy included in their rent, for example. And so, that's the way to have a time series, but the level of aggregation makes it really challenging to explore. And then there's the public use microdata files, but for, I don't know, Statistics Canada is really low, or the University of Calgary's data librarians haven't been pushing that, but as far as I'm aware, only the 2017 pump is available. And so I think I have access to 2011 and 2017, and there was a survey change between the two. So it makes time series really challenging. So yeah, one organization used the 2016 census to do their custom tabulations, and so it's CUSP. I can't remember what the acronym is for, but so they look at energy poverty, and so I think there's possibility of using census data, but really in order to get the level of detailed data you need, it's going into a research data center or custom tabulations, which requires funding. Which is why we use the social policy database and model. It's synthetic microdata, and it means we have lots of observations. So it's like, it's a point in time estimate of energy poverty, but at least it helps us sort of figure out what's interesting and what metrics might be useful to look at to better target the private data from Statistics Canada. Okay. It stopped. I told you we would have technical challenges. Yeah, I think it's okay. There we go. Better. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through 7 indicators that we've uncovered in the literature, and I apologize that this is going to be a little bit repetitive and boring. So the first, I'll do my best to make it interesting and go through it quickly. So the first indicator is this income-based 10% threshold. So if a household's energy expenditure divided by its income is greater than 10%, they're deemed to be in energy poverty. The fun thing about this indicator is that it's ubiquitous. So this is the one that NRCan uses. It's one that most of the research exploring energy poverty in Canada has used. This is from 1991 in the UK. It's this 10% threshold is not actually arbitrary. It was 2 times the national median of that ratio in the UK in 1990. So it comes from somewhere, but a big problem in the literature is that everyone has said, oh, hey, this is a nice threshold. We'll just pick it up and use it with no actual consideration of its appropriateness for the current situation. So one of its strengths, it's simple, easy to use. It makes the work we're doing comparable with pretty much everyone else. So it has sensitivity to energy prices. It's arbitrary. It can misclassify high income energy obese households as in energy poverty. And it also has no conditioning on household size or other characteristics that we might think are important when evaluating whether or not a household is in energy poverty. Okay. Alternatively, people have explored energy expenditure as a share of total household expenditure as and using the same threshold. So this one is, okay, so energy expenditure as a share of total expenditure might be a better indicator of lifetime consumption. But at the same time, they've picked up an arbitrary threshold from another metric and applied it to this. And I'm showing this just because like this is sort of what's out there in the literature is the conjecture of how we think about energy poverty. Again, simple, easy to use, et cetera, et cetera. And it has many of the same weaknesses of that first indicator. Okay, so this indicator is income-based threshold of twice the national median of that ratio. Excuse me. And so this is the approach from that 1991 paper from the UK. We've modified it for our purposes. So here H is for household, S is for size, and P is for province. And for our purposes, we think it makes more sense to condition the median on household size and province, just given the differences in climates across provinces. So it's not the national median, but it's the provincial median condition on household size. So this is potentially slightly better. And again, it's energy expenditure to income ratio. It's a threshold related to that distribution of income and expenditure, and avoids a problem of these static thresholds not adjusting to changes in prices and incomes over time, and it accounts for different household sizes. And oh yeah, also I apologize for like breaking every slide rule by having a list of words rather than bullets and too much text. I did warn you that this is a work in progress. What's a challenge here is that it is measuring relative energy poverty because we're measuring a given household relative to a median. Rather than a threshold which measures absolute energy poverty. And so it instead of measuring energy poverty, it identifies energy inequality, which might be worthwhile. Anyway, it doesn't describe the severity or depth of energy policy or energy poverty. So sort of, if you can think of a hypothetical household, and what's a reasonable amount of energy consumption? The depth of energy poverty is a household's energy use relative to that idealized energy use. And again, 2 times the median is somewhat of an arbitrary threshold. Yeah.
Jennifer, when you use these indicators, do you look at how they compare with sort of national rates of poverty in general across different countries? So I guess my reasoning for asking that is some European countries, their energy prices are just significantly higher than they are here. So somebody here might be considered poor, but not energy poor by some of these metrics, whereas a comparable family in the UK might not be. So how do you account for those differences?
That is a great point. Some of the other indicators try and address that, I think. Yeah, so this this next one.
Okay.
But that actually that's a really great idea, and it's a good thing we're recording this because I forgot to bring something to write down ideas. But it's comparing households that are poor to a variety of poverty metrics to whether or not they're energy poor. Okay, so Hills 2012. So in 2012, the UK, 2011 and 2012, the UK embarked on a review of its energy poverty measure. And there were a couple very large reports. And the result of this was this Hills recommendation to have 2 conditions on energy poverty. So low income and high costs. So should have reversed the equations. So first, the high cost. It's if a household's energy expenditure is greater than the median energy expenditure. Here, we're conditioning on household size and the province. What the UK did and what Hills recommended is constructing modeled energy expenditure for given household characteristics, like if they live in an apartment or a row house and have a certain size. The UK has great data, so they're able to do that. We don't. So we're just using median energy expenditure. And the idea is they're a house with relatively higher expenditure on energy. And the second condition is that their income after housing costs, so that's rent or mortgage or maintenance and repairs and water and sanitation, less median energy expenditure, again, we're conditioning on province and household size, is less than that market basket measure threshold of income. So the idea is high cost of energy and your income after your housing costs and after expenditure on energy is lower than the poverty line. So I think that partially gets at your question. So again, this is a modified one because the UK has a specific poverty line, and we use the market basket measure, which is Canada's poverty line, and that's dependent on province, household size, and region. So like the size of the urban environment that the household is in. Okay, so this one, it corrects for some of the challenges with the other indicators that I talked about. The comparison of energy expenditure relative to the median, that measures the depth of energy poverty. If you believe that median energy expenditure is an appropriate measure of, or deviations from that is an appropriate measure of energy poverty. It accounts for different household sizes and types. It includes that income threshold, so it's going to filter out those high income energy obese households. The weaknesses is that it's complex and not transparent. And and this is a problem with many of the indicators, but it doesn't identify where reducing energy costs, so improving energy efficiency, will alleviate energy poverty. And it's difficult to compare over time because of, excuse me, the two conditions. And then lastly, using medians, it may be arbitrary, too high, et cetera, et cetera. Another approach, so there is also a special issue of energy policy in 2012 devoted to energy poverty, and so there was a bunch of papers arguing about what's the most appropriate measure. So more argued against the Hills measure and argued instead that we should just look at if income after housing costs less your household energy expenditure is, if it's less than that market basket measure, so at less than a poverty line, or called a minimum income standard, then a household is in energy poverty. So it's simple, includes these housing costs and sort of the necessaries of life in the measure of energy poverty, allows for determining the scale of energy poverty. But again, it does require defining what a minimum income standard is, so it makes it challenging. So I guess, the big picture here is none of the measures put forward by the literature are particularly ideal for getting at the question we're trying to answer. And so I don't actually have a preferred definition. Maybe through this we will come up with one, but it is an evolving literature that's imperfect, and it's quite possible that all of this work is not useful, and more qualitative assessments of energy poverty are better aimed at addressing the issue. I mean, the benefit of these quantitative methods is, assuming you have data, at least you can evaluate proportions. Assuming you have data and believe any of these metrics, you have data to identify trends over time. Okay, here's another attempt at energy poverty relative to based on a minimum income standard. And here, it's if your household income less than household income minus their market basket measure threshold is less than their energy expenditure deviation from the mean plus their housing costs deviation from the mean. So it's basically is their income sufficiently above the poverty line to pay for energy and housing costs relative to mean energy expenditure and housing costs. And again, this is a complex method that is trying to, again, account for some of the arbitrary nature of measuring energy poverty.
That one might not work so well now in like Toronto or Vancouver, a lot of most poor people.
Yeah. Yeah. Luckily, so one thing about the social policy database is that it's a fixed point in time that Statistics Canada updates every time they release a new version. So the version I'm using, it's pinned to 2017. So version 29 is pinned to 2017. Version 28 will be pinned to 2016. Version 30 will be 2018. So as long as I don't delete versions of SPSDM from my computer, I have access to a synthetic time series. But yeah, it's, again, yeah, none of these metrics are ideal. Okay, last is what's called hidden energy poverty. And it's meant to identify households that just have very low energy use. So the types of households that are facing that eat or heat decision. The challenge is that it will falsely label as energy poor individuals who have energy included in a rent, so like electricity and heat. And again, an arbitrary threshold.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do these measures consider the energy intensity of household activities, also lifestyles?
The ones that condition on household size do, so like the Hills 2012 measure. So the old UK poverty line, yeah, that's one that corrects for household size, but the majority of them do not. In looking at this, whenever there's a median or a mean, we are conditioning on province and household size rather than using the national mean or median.
But like for bigger sized households, there can be some like environmental behaviors or energy saving lifestyles, right? Their expenditure in that case can be lower.
Yeah, I don't have that.
Okay.
I was wondering when to ask, but maybe following up on your comment, it's all about expenditures, and you talk about the measurement and the complication of comparing to anything.
Mhm.
But with your motivation, climate change and carbon taxation and so on, isn't energy poverty also about, over time, the ability of a household to, I guess, change their energy behavior by upgrading their furnace, making investment decisions, renovating their house by putting insulation in the walls? Isn't that also the ability to mitigate your energy use and expenditure a factor in poverty? Because I would assume that low income households just lack the ability to do something about wherever they are on the continuum.
Yes, absolutely.
But no, you can't measure it because
I mean, I can partially measure. So in the database, there's a question about whether or not a house is suitable for living in based on the national standards. And then there's another question about whether or not the house needs minor repairs or regular repairs and maintenance, or more major repairs, and then something else which seems extreme. But so there are these questions. I don't have results to show you, but yeah. Okay. Right, and so here's the indicators previously used in Canadian literature. and I apologize for the font size. Basically, it's energy expenditure relative to after-tax income. So it's all, the majority of the papers are looking at these fairly arbitrary, simple measures of energy expenditure. So cost, the group that used the 2016 census, they at least did 6% of after-tax income, which was twice the national median. So at least they use something relevant for Canada rather than the 10% threshold. And I suspect that the preponderance of 10% threshold analysis is really due to the availability and quality of data in Canada. Okay, so SPSDM is a underutilized tool in Canadian policy analysis. So it's a non-confidential, statistically representative database of Canadian households. So it's synthetic microdata. It's based on merger of the Survey of Household Spending, the Canadian Income Survey, the TIF survey, so the T1s, and so what's really nice about this is it brings in all these variables of interest, and including household characteristics like size, number of people, same thing as size, sorry, number of children, number of elderly, whether or not there's a spouse present, whether there's like a single adult with children. So lots of richness of data. The downside is it's a single year. So what I'm showing you today is going to be a point in time, but it also has really detailed information on income and tax and transfers and consumption categories and consumption tax categories. So, basically everything almost everything you could want to know about a household, it has it. So it allows really fine simulation of policy and tax changes, like changing personal income taxes or increasing the climate action incentive or implementing a GST in Alberta or something. We can hope, right? And so it allows for detailed counterfactual simulation of tax and transfer policies. So when we get to the looking at mitigating energy poverty part of our research in the next couple of months, that's when we'll rely on the database and modeling portion. And so one of the other things we can do is play around with minimum income standards and things like that as well, and how that affects energy poverty definitions. So for the
Sorry, a little unrelated, Jennifer, but is there any research that looks at, I know there's some research, I don't know how much there is, looking at consumer responses to changes in energy pricing? And so if I think about it, let's just use my household, for example. Prices went up a lot over the last few months, as we all know.
Yeah.
We didn't really change anything.
Yeah.
Right? If we were, however, energy poor, I might have yelled at my kids some more to turn off the lights in their room, turn off the faucet, etc. So I know that there are papers, and there's one from people from UC Davis that looked at average versus marginal pricing.
Mm-hmm.
But are there other papers that look at maybe like when prices do skyrocket? Here I'm thinking about like Texas last year. Are there people who are like really cutting down, and that might be an indicator of they're basically constrained?
Yeah, I can't think of the authors, but there is a paper that looks at people who grew up in the OPEC energy crisis is in the 70s? Yes, sorry. And they are like that had a persistent effect in that they are more frugal throughout their life, directly in response to energy prices, I am not sure. Yeah.
Just curious.
Yeah, but good thing, I'll look into it. Did you have a?
I just came to my mind, I mean, there is a little bit of literature, I think, around the adoption of energy efficient measures by households, I think out of the US and some other places.
Yeah.
But that's not a short-term reaction, that's more like, you know, upgrading and awareness of energy efficiency.
Yeah. There might be some stuff, there's like Newfoundland, I think, lowered its gas tax at some point. But, sorry, now I'm like really speculating, so I'll stop there. But yeah, that's a good thing. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether I have not come across this SPSD model before, so I'm just wondering whether it has any similarity with the social accounting metrics of CG modeling.
It's input output base, or so it's and the like the basic of the basis of both is an input output model of flows in the economy. So yeah, it has that baked into it. Yeah. But it does not. So you in the modeling part of SPSDM, you are allowed to set elasticity parameters to make assumptions about some behavioral changes, but that's pretty limited. So it's very much like a short-term modeling exercise of changes. Okay. So for this, I have just over 450,000 household level observations, and that's after restricting it to households with one economic family. So it excludes households where, say, it's a bunch of university roommates. They're excluded from this analysis, and that's because of the way the expenditure data is treated. It's at the household level rather than the economic family level, and so I'd be double counting expenditure if I used households with multiple economic families, and I also remove institutionalized elderly because there's no defined market basket measure threshold for them. So I use the base year inflated to 2020. And then my measure of income comes from the poverty literature. And so that's discretionary income. So income, excuse me, available to purchase goods and services. So that's your after-tax income and after non-discretionary spending, so payroll deductions and child support payments, childcare expenses, that sort of thing. So it's after-tax income, after non-discretionary spending, but before transfers. And so this is the measure generally accepted for income in the poverty literature. And so, you know, one of my ideas is to explore how the definition of income also affects energy poverty. Okay. And then energy expenditure, I'm including electricity, natural gas, other fuels, assuming they're heating oil, and then motor fuels, assuming it's gasoline. And then I'm including in energy expenditure federal and provincial consumption taxes, so like the gas taxes. And then I'm excluding carbon taxes because I want to have that explicit comparison of when I add carbon taxes to energy expenditure, what does that do to energy poverty? And since this is 2017, the only provinces that matter are BC and Alberta. Not the only provinces that matter. Sorry, the only provinces with explicit carbon taxes are BC and Alberta, because with Quebec's cap and trade system, it's in the it's embedded in the purchase of goods and services, and yeah, I think that was my point. Oh, and the other thing is, because I'm using after-tax income, but before taxes, or before transfers, the transfers, like in BC for the carbon tax rebate, it doesn't matter for my income measure, which is convenient. If I was using another measure of income, I am able to zero that out in SPSDM, but it's the definitions I'm using means that we're able to explicitly look at the effect of carbon pricing on energy poverty. Okay, here's energy expenditure by province and income decile, including these consumption taxes. I apologize for the obnoxious colors. And so basically, we have energy expenditure increasing with income across provinces. And then there are some, well, basically the higher income provinces have higher energy expenditure. So Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario.
Sorry, what's the base, or what's it's taxes?
Oh, the deciles, income deciles.
Oh, deciles.
And these are within province income deciles based on the discretionary income. Okay, and here's the carbon tax cost estimate. So to start with, I'm just taking these are the average within decile and province carbon tax costs that I've estimated with co-authors in a separate paper. And I'm using those as the carbon tax costs that I'm applying to households. And in the future, I'm going to try and construct household-specific carbon tax estimates at $50 a ton, but for a first pass, just using these. And the interesting things here is that provinces like Alberta, like Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick, with more emissions-intensive energy systems, have higher carbon tax costs. No surprise. Okay, so as I said, these are very preliminary results, and I'm just going to sort of walk you through a bunch of pictures and tell you what I think is interesting. And again, I apologize for the obnoxious colors and the small font, which embedded in is like these, some of these things that look way better on my small screen than here. So again, I apologize. All right. Here is the distribution of the energy income shares. This is in-home energy expenditure excluding carbon taxes. Here I'm including, so all household direct energy expenditure, so the in-home plus transportation energy expenditure. Top right is the in-home energy expenditure, including carbon taxes, and then bottom right is the all household energy expenditure, including carbon taxes. So moving from top left to top right, we have an increase of 0.2 percentage point share of households spending greater than 10% when I add carbon taxes to their energy expenditure. And then when what's I think particularly interesting is when I include transportation expenditure in the share, we moved from 2% of households spending more than 10% to 7.4% of households. So what you consider energy expenditure in defining energy poverty matters quite a bit for capturing the number of households considered to be energy poor. And then moving from all household energy expenditure to excluding carbon tax to including the carbon tax, we go from 7.4% to 8.1%. So it's not just that we're capturing more households by including transportation. It's when including transportation, we're going to we capture a greater increase in the share of households so affected by carbon pricing and like tipped into energy poverty.
So what stops people from, transitioning to like taking public transit? And then, from the move, say carbon tax impacts their driving, right? So then they're like, okay, well, I'm starting with a bus, which is unrealistic, but here in Edmonton anyways. But let's just say that they start using a bus and then they wouldn't be captured in there, but they would still be technically energy poverty.
Yeah, so this is, it's a point in time, and I'm assuming zero behavioral change.
Oh,
yeah.
Just out of curiosity, did you look at some of the people who spend 40%? Like, what is it?
Oh yeah, it's
Bitcoin mining.
there's some weird stuff going on. Yeah, it's there's some households where it's greater than 100%. So yeah, there's.
You keep those.
Yes, yeah, right now I haven't done sort of the digging for some of like the outlier observations. Yeah, so I truncated these.
What about like the 0%?
Oh yeah, so in each there's quite a few who have spent nothing on energy.
Is it because they have renewal of the grid? Something like that.
I would have to look at the household characteristics to be able to say something. It's quite possible that they live in a condo or an apartment and they take the bus.
Renters who don't drive.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does this expenditure include, for example, investment in off-grid energy sources?
No, this is solely household expenditure on electricity, natural gas, other fuels, and transportation. So it's not capital investments associated with energy. That's a different expenditure category. Okay. And here's the second indicator. So it's just the expense. So it's household energy expenditure as a share of total expenditure. Here, we're capturing so again, top left is in-home energy expenditure, excluding carbon taxes, and compared to that income threshold, we're defining a lot more households as in energy poverty. And what I find particularly shocking is that when I include transportation, I go from 8.4% to 32.4% of households who have energy expenditure greater than 10% of their total expenditure. So again, yeah, this is something where it's like I really have to dig into the data to figure out what is going on. So moving from excluding carbon taxes to including carbon taxes, we go from 8.4% to 9.4%. So slight increase in the share of households defined as energy poor, and we're capturing more relative to that first indicator. Interestingly, with that first indicator, we went from 7.4 to 8.1 here. When we're talking about all energy expenditure, going from 32.4 to 36.5. So yeah, again, not much of a change. It could be this, some of these results could be because I'm just using within decile averages for carbon taxes. And so I'm understating the effect of carbon taxes on some households and overstating on others. But yeah, I was like, yeah, really interested in hearing what you think is interesting here.
And what the point talked about is this sort of a heavy commuting effect from major urban centers, and also in rural areas, driving 2 hours to work and back sort of thing.
Oh, yeah.
Every day.
Yeah. Vic.
Can you split between other characteristics like rural, urban, central division, anything like that?
Yeah, I can. I know if they're like in a province and then the size of the city, say it's like 400 or 500,000 and above, and then there's a big bin between like, I think 100,000 to 499, 99. Yeah.
Do you have information about the number of vehicles, for instance, in the household?
I don't know if I have information about number of vehicles. Interesting.
Certainly you wouldn't have Megan all the way.
Yeah, definitely not. I mean, I could also condition on, say, household size or household composition to try and see if there's anything interesting there. And I think I do a little bit of that coming up. Okay, right. So here, I'm doing like a lot of different ways of cutting the data, and I decided it made the most sense to compare indicators by, say, income deciles, and then province, and then household type. So I'd also be interested in knowing if you think there's a better way to compare everything. Okay, so here's the first indicator, this income-based threshold. Again, so green is in-home energy expenditure excluding carbon taxes, and then the orange is in-home including carbon taxes. Blue is all, and so adding transportation, excluding carbon taxes, and then red is all energy. Sorry, that's wrong. It should be including carbon taxes. So this is the same pattern all along. I'm very, very consistent. Okay, so this first indicator, it's capturing a lot of households in the bottom income decile, which I think is no surprise. If expenditure is divided by income is greater than 10%, we're more likely to find it in these lower income deciles. What I think is particularly interesting is the sharp drop off between decile 1 and decile 2, except when we add transportation, and then it's much, much smoother. And I also apologize, none of the axes are going to be the same, and that's because of the huge variation in what the indicators capture. Okay, so expenditure-based threshold, what I find interesting here is that we have like lots of energy obese rich households that it is capturing, and that's particularly a problem when we include transportation energy expenditure. This one is, it's pretty because we got this nice decline. So that makes me feel good about it as a measure, but it's got this weird thing where when I add carbon taxes, fewer households are classified as in energy poverty. And I was looking at this yesterday, and I was like, I have no idea. And I double checked, and I'm adding carbon pricing to the numerator and the denominator. So it's not, maybe I shouldn't do that. But I'm pretty pretty sure I should. But anyway, I looked at this and I thought, this is very strange. I need to figure out what is going on with it. And I mean, maybe it's just a signal that this is actually a bad measure or indicator for energy poverty. And you'll notice I'm calling them indicators rather than measures because I'm not particularly confident that they're actually truly measuring energy poverty. So this is the household has to be low income and have high costs. And what is nice about this one is it's clearly excluding those energy abuse high income households. And so despite its complexity, I in many ways have the most confidence as a measure or potential measure of energy poverty.
What decile represents the poverty line in Canada? Is it the second one?
It's not based on decile. It is based on where you live and an accounting of the like cost of living. Yeah, called the market basket measure. So I don't know what it
varies a lot.
Yeah,
Across
yeah, it
the province.
does.
It does. Okay.
Yeah. Vancouver's is the highest in Canada, I believe, which, and I think it's around, it might be like 40-some thousand for a house, but it also, or a household of like maybe 4 people. It's also adjusted for household size. Yeah, I'm not sure. That's a good thing to check. Thank you. Here's one with the minimum income standard, and it's also eliminating the higher income households, which is good. It's capturing quite a few households in that first income decile, which again may or may not be accurate, which is also one of the reasons I need to look at sort of the outliers and the tails of the distribution of expenditure.
What is the first decile too? You know, like, it's between it's a bracket, right?
Yeah. So I constructed it based on that discretionary income. I don't know the cutoffs. Yeah. Also something good to report and to have shown you. Okay. So here's the second minimum income standard. Here we're getting about like in that first income decile, we still have that same problem with introducing carbon taxes, like decreasing the share of households in energy poverty, but it's much less. It could be a rounding error, but yeah, it's still an issue. And compared to the more minimum income standard, we're capturing somewhere around 17 or 18% in that first income decile, and then a very small share in the second and third. So the more one is clearly a very broad definition of energy poverty. Okay, and here is this hidden energy poverty, and that's where it's households that have expenditure less than half the median. And I forgot to exclude households with 0 expenditure, and I apologize. So this graph is entirely useless at this point because it's capturing all those people who are not, don't have to pay for their energy. So I apologize. Okay. Let's look at the same indicators by by province. And, you know, feel free to tell me to hurry through because it's sort of the exact same stuff, and we can get to more interesting things like household type. One thing I will notice is, for whatever reason, like Saskatchewan is classified as more likely to have households who are energy poor, and then the Atlantic provinces. So I'm not particularly surprised about the Atlantic provinces, given their energy costs tend to be higher and their dependence on heating oil, but I am surprised about Saskatchewan. And so this could be a function of, I don't know, like richer province that has like more likely to be like energy obese households. I'm not sure.
Is it possible that in Saskatchewan, they have like a lot of energy use for like tractors and like agricultural equipment? That
This is household.
Oh, this is just household, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like a lot of farmers are like, well, I guess it is a business, so, but I don't know.
I was just thinking of density of like the household itself, because like Saskatchewan doesn't have that many dense neighborhoods or apartment buildings compared to BC, Ontario, that kind of thing. So if everybody's paying for, well, for a house, right, rather than much higher proportions spending for condos and that kind of thing.
Yeah, I do have dwelling type. So that's a good thing to compare against. And but your theory could explain why the transportation is such a big deal in Saskatchewan. Okay. So it's here, expenditure based. Again, we're capturing lots of households. So I think, again, like a signal that it's not the best measure. We see Alberta and Ontario and Saskatchewan, so the higher income provinces are being potentially mischaracterized as energy poor. This is interesting because it suggests that there's no variation in provinces. So again, perhaps not the best measure. I guess, you know, some of this is really trying to sort out, do these metrics make sense? And I'm starting to feel like this one does not, especially because we're got that, basically the unexpected sign in including carbon pricing. But by province, not particularly interesting. I think the only thing is the consistency in Atlantic Canada provinces, which is somewhat informative. And high levels of hidden energy poverty, but again, they're not excluding the zeros, so that's useless. Okay, so household type, potentially more interesting for us. So 1 adult with kids, 2 or more adults with kids, 1 adult who is elderly, 2 or more adults with an elderly person, 1 adult, and then 2 or more adults but no kids. That's the order. In the data, I actually have number of adults, number of earners, number of elderly, and number of children. So I am able to come up with more useful categorizations. This was just the pre-populated household types. And so it was easiest to just use them as a first pass at the data. Okay, so what I find most interesting here is, I think this is not particularly surprising, but single parent with kids and a single elderly person more likely to be characterized as energy poor. 2 adults with kids, very low likelihood. And again, this other 2+ adults, it's probably two, like a married couple without children. And so again, without saying anything about the number of earners, it's not, these patterns are not particularly surprising. I do think what's interesting with this one adult and no kid and kids, we have this the largest jump when we add transportation to it. Okay, expenditure based. Again, it's things mostly as expected. The highest preponderance of energy poverty is in single elderly and then the single parent with kids. This, yeah, we're seeing, except for indicator 1, we're seeing fairly similar patterns from indicator 2 and indicator 3, indicator 4, opposite pattern with indicator 5, which is interesting. And so again, it's like speaks to perhaps this minimum income standard isn't the best measure. Oh, wait a
Isn't that
second.
different though?
Yeah, huh, okay, sorry. I do have one, I apologize. I don't know how that happened, but so here is an example of the household type, and it is indicator 5. So apologize. So a single detached house, double row, terrace or duplex, apartment, other not stated. But this was not the picture I was expecting, and so I'm having a little bit of trouble interpreting it. I guess I am perhaps a bit surprised that someone in an apartment is capturing higher share of households in energy poverty. Yeah, Vic?
Isn't it just capturing incomes potentially?
It might be, yeah.
The single family, that's a higher income category.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's other, just out of curiosity?
Mobile home.
Oh, mobile home, okay.
It might be. I'd have to go look at the documentation. Yeah. So so some of these will potentially be more interesting if it's not just like a single cut of the data, but house type conditional on deciles. Okay, so now we're back to excuse me, back to household type. Okay, and so again, the same pattern that we're seeing before. What's interesting here is that we're also getting, the share of households is quite small, but it's also picking out single adult as potentially being in energy poverty. And then here with hidden energy poverty, oh, right, forgot the zeros, so I'll just ignore that. Okay, last, household size, and what I think is interesting is this is probably correlated with income in that richer households are more likely to be larger, but again, it's capturing sort of the single smaller households are more likely to be energy poverty. We don't like indicator 3. Wait, no, that was indicator 2. Ah, shoot, sorry, I'm really sorry. Wrong picture, I apologize. Okay. Is that actually the same? Yeah, it is. Okay, it is actually the same picture. It wasn't just a labeling error. I apologize. Okay, so here's indicator 4. It's capturing a small amount of households, and it's mostly capturing single person households. Indicator 6. Yeah, this one is more more interesting. It's basically all of these indicators are capturing single person households, and that's the majority of people who are considered energy poor. Okay, very, very quickly, we look at composite indicators, sort of like what households are captured by multiple indicators. So the idea is with all of them being imperfect measures, if a household is captured by more than one, there's likely to be congruence in energy poverty. So I'm just showing, so here's by decile. Green is at least 4 indicators, orange is 5, and blue is 6. And so the more indicators try to apply, the fewer households we're capturing. But I think it is somewhat informative that almost 21% of households are deemed to be in energy poverty in the lower income or lowest income decile. Here's by province, and again, Saskatchewan, and then the Atlantic provinces. And then here, the household type, again, it's the single parent with kids, single elderly person, and then the single family, yeah.
And you're measuring the carbon tax portion and how it goes down from the original 2.
Mm-hmm.
Does that portion also measure the amount that they get back in rebate?
No, I'm ignoring rebates.
removed.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's not included in the.
no,
Okay,
no, I'm trying to figure out like what's the direct impact.
yeah.
And then we would layer on, okay, how does use of revenue tools alleviate that? Okay, and last, household size. What I find interesting here is that we still have, like, so it is capturing some large households that are potentially in energy poverty, and so that's a little bit interesting. Okay, so perhaps not surprisingly, the energy poverty definition is sensitive to my energy expenditure definition. Have to look into that a little bit more in terms of like comparing by region of different provinces. So the households in Atlantic provinces are more likely to be classified as in energy poverty. Energy poverty is correlated with the household size, the household type, and low incomes. Again, not particularly surprising. And then so far we found that carbon taxes at $50 a ton have a relatively small effect on energy poverty. And so next steps, we're going to look at other correlates of interest, such as urban versus rural, number of children, more defined household size, conditioning on multiple indicators, looking at other income definitions, and then looking at uses of revenue to alleviate energy poverty. So, thank you so much for your time and the great questions.
Yeah, just if like, you don't have, Yukon and WP for the nothing in it.
No, they're excluded from SPSD. Yeah,
Because of size.
I'm not sure. Because I think they are in the survey of household spending pumps. Yeah, I wish they were. Yeah. I mean, like this is particularly important for those provinces. Oh, but I do think in the survey of household spending, it's only Whitehorse, Yellowknife, and Iqaluit. So, maybe adding them is not. Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes, I wanted to know if you have access to information about if they are from an indigenous community or not in the household.
I don't think that's in, but I should check. Yes,
And I
thank
think
you.
it's interesting.
Yeah, there might be those more cultural characteristics, but I haven't looked for it.
So you from time to time use the word energy obesity.
Yeah.
And I wonder if your next steps, you could dig into that, right? Because we have, think about other like food and food obesity and poverty, they're related to each other. So poor people tend to have worse eating habits, they're eating processed food, they're getting obese as a result of that. Obesity isn't a measure of overconsumption, so a measure of something else. I wonder if that is the same thing with energy obesity. So whether you could pull out that one.
It could be. Yeah, I could try. So energy obesity it was Blake's term. It's like he has 4 kids and large house and so he that's like uses a lot of energy. Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah, so you used like time indicators, right? So I mean, did you get any conclusion like whether which one is the best or appropriate indicator for Canada? Did you get any conclusion like that?
So yeah, we debated this in a report, or when we were writing our report for the BC Basic Income Panel, is like which one is the best, which one makes sense. And given like the variation, that's actually why we decided on the that composite indicator, because we didn't really feel comfortable saying, any of them is the one and is appropriate for use in Canada. So I think that's a little bit of hand waving, assuming away the problem, but it's also there's no real agreement in the literature on a true definitions. So and they all have strengths and weaknesses. So and so in many ways that's why we thought it's best to use a composite. If a household is caught by more than one indicator, then at least I think it's signaling something about the challenges faced by that household.
So obviously we put in environmental taxes as a means to incentivize households to decrease energy spending overall, right? Mm-hmm. And I'm interested in, at the very beginning, you talked about this distaste for rebates. And is that just a distaste for them in general? Or, I'm looking at your data, and for example, households with children have higher income costs. And, mm-hmm. What about how Alberta's system originally was, where we did have rebates for households based on income, based on how many children you had? Like, is that not a very empathetic solution for energy poverty? Or what would you propose as sort of a option to still utilize what is a great tool for decreasing costs across the system without impacting low-income families disproportionately?
Yeah, so I think I would say there's no one policy solution to this problem, and part of the challenge associated with rebates is it's one time through the tax system, and so there's the issue of, is everyone filing their taxes? Because many people who don't have any income or are low income, or Indigenous peoples in particular, lack of trust in the government, they're not necessarily filing taxes, so they're not accessing those rebates in the tax system. So that's a challenge. I think if and then it's also it's at one time, whereas energy expenditure is happening year round, and so it's quite possible that more direct approaches to addressing energy poverty might be more appropriate. I mean, the problem with the government's current approach of eliminating, say, like the taxes on gasoline is, it's benefiting a specific subset of the population without actually addressing the broader affordability problem. I think like that's the.
Okay, so you're critiquing very much like the tax rebate as opposed to say like Alberta, if you were low income, you got a check every 4 months, every 3 months,
Mhm.
you were low income from the carbon tax. I think many of us in this room got that because we would a lot of us would be low income. You're critiquing very much like the tax rebate, but as opposed to like utilizing carbon taxes, giving that back to low income families.
So I guess it's like, I'm not sure that using carbon tax revenue is the best way to address the issue of energy poverty. So using the carbon tax revenue is to offset, or like the purpose is to offset costs to households, some of which are low income and some of which are in energy poverty. So it's, the current approach is uniform redistribution, which is, equitable in one sense, but inequitable in others. And so I think that's why I say there's no one policy lever. It's like, first, let's understand the sort of the depth and scope of the problem.
Okay, thank you. Next week we have the department party at 4
Yeah,
o'clock.
it's probably one in the chat box.
No, that's me.
John saying.
John.
Very cozy.
Okay, thank you again.